Hey everyone, it's Austin in the middle, and I hope you're having a great day so far today. I have a movie review of a film that goes back to my childhood, like the Agent Cody Banks movies, and I brought this film up in my Agent Cody Banks review, the first film I'm referring to, at least. And I mentioned in that video that this film also comes to do a teenage fantasy movie as well. And while I don't think this one is as good as the first Agent Cody Banks, I still think it holds up today. And I saw my friend Strange Michael slash Night of the Living Dude reviewed this movie recently, and it sparked my interest to rewatch it. And I have to agree with my friend, it does hold up quite well. And it's 2002's Clockstoppers. Now, in case you didn't know, Clockstoppers was a Nickelodeon original movie that released theatrically. All of the films historically with Nickelodeon has released under the Paramount banner because Paramount's the studio that owns Nickelodeon. And I remember the ad campaign for this movie pretty strongly. It was pretty much all over Nickelodeon in late 2001 to early 2002. They were promoting this movie in the magazines. They were creating buzz around it because I used to be a magazine subscriber back in the day. And there was just so much hype. The commercials played up the effects of the time, which looked pretty great. This was the era of the X-Men movie CGI. And a lot of it is prevalent here. But man, when I say this movie holds up today, and it does hold up. It's one of those teenage fantasy films that were quite popular in the early 2000s with teenagers. And it probably doesn't deserve to be as good as it is. Kind of like the Agent Cody Banks original movie. There's something about this that I think Agent Cody Banks also captures. And it's this small world, self-contained universe type story that Hollywood just doesn't make today. And it's one of those hour and a half minutes, easy to digest, very action-packed, kind of unique in its idea and premise, with some wholehearted moments and just an overall fun time. Now, Clockstoppers, some cool facts I want to throw out. There's two of them. In case you didn't know, the main writer on this film, Rob Hedden, he had a quite sad career in Hollywood, looking at IMDb on some films he did. The only two I recognize are, of course, Clockstoppers, but back in the 1980s, he actually did another Paramount movie that is quite well known in a certain fandom, and it's Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Yes, the writer of Jason Takes Manhattan wrote Clockstoppers. Now, he did have some other help. The other writers were not important to me, but it's J. David Stem and David N. Wise. I recognize David Wise from a couple other movies. But Clockstoppers, I will say, is definitely a better Jason Takes Manhattan. So, in a lot of ways, Rob Hedden, you've redeemed yourself in my eyes. And another fact is that this movie is directed by Jonathan Frakes, who you might recognize, especially if you were an early 2000s kid. He was the host of Beyond Belief Fact or Fiction after he took over the show after season 1 from the previous host. That's an iconic meme these days. People are using him to say like false and true on memes. I love that. But also he's more recognized as one of the starring roles in Star Trek The Next Generation. And it took me years to realize that Jonathan Frakes himself directed this movie. And considering that he never really made much movies outside of this was not half bad, I have to say. Now, this movie is the teenage fantasy come to life, and I brought it up in Agent Cody Banks, but I'll bring it up here again. The teenage fantasy was, at one point, that illustrious, goal that Agent Cody Banks and Clockstoppers came to bring for films for teens back in the early 2000s. Essentially what it was is that you get a movie centered around realistic teenagers stuck in a mundane lifestyle of going to school, having maybe some hobbies and interests that are considered normal by popular standards, and nothing really comes of event in their life all that much. But you throw something in extraordinary with their character, like in this case, in this movie, there's a gadget involved that makes the character become larger than life. Or like in the case of Agent Cody Banks, you give him this background where he's had CIA training at a summer camp. And these things separate themselves from their peers and make them larger than life, which essentially provides an escapism for these characters to live through and for the audience to experience. Because as teenagers, we all want that cool gadget, or we all want CIA training in summer camp. That's stuff that teenagers like. And also, a part of that is kind of surrounding that. You know, I brought this up in Cody Banks as well. Kids want access to gadgets that only adults normally have access to. In the case of Cody Banks, it was spy gadgets, and here it's a watch that can stop time and put you into hyper time, right? It has that going for it, and of course, the romance that teenagers all feel. They all have their crushes. They all want to end up with their crushes, and it has that in the story as well. Clockstoppers, in my opinion, like I said, it's not as good as Agent Cody Banks, but it still holds up, and it's still a movie worth checking out. So I want to go over the plot synopsis very briefly, skim over the surface without too many spoilers, just so you can enjoy the film for what it is. I want you to go experience it for yourselves, because I think you'll have a fun time regardless. Now, the story is about this 17-year-old kid named Zach, who's played by Jesse Bradford. He's the leading actor in this film. I don't know if you can see him. He's the middle guy here. The only movies I recognize him from is this 90s movie from 20th Century Fox called Far From Home, and then he was in Bring It On, their first movie from 2000. That's the only other films I've ever seen him in personally. But he did an alright job here. But he plays his main character, I think his name is Zach. And he rides a bike. He's kind of talented. There's some ridiculous stunt work. Obviously with a BMX double where he can do tricks on his bike. And he's kind of a show-off. And he rides his bike around his small town. And he goes to like thrift stores and picks up items to flip on eBay to make extra cash, even though his dad is like filthy rich because he teaches at a prestigious college. And you have this environment for this character where he does all these things for himself that he doesn't need to do really. But you understand that Zach is just that intuitive type of guy. He's self-reliant. He likes to take charge and do his own thing. And he has his best friend named Meeker that works at this, like, exhibition club type of thing. You go in there, you can rock climb, you can paintball, maybe do laser tag, I don't know. There used to be a lot of those places in the early 2000s. But Meeker works there. And they catch this new girl named Francesca who just moved from South America to the country. She's like an exchange student, and Francesca is revealed to have a nice home. Her parents are quite wealthy and well off, and Zach develops a crush with her and tries to impress her, but Francesca's not buying what Zach is, selling. But this all kind of coincides with pretty much the main plot that kicks off the story. We meet early on in the film this bearded guy who's played by French Stewart, who you might recognize from like Inspector Gadget 2 and Home Alone 4, Taking Back the House. Yeah. But French Stewart, he gets abducted, seemingly out of nowhere, out of thin air. And the way he gets abducted looks kind of strange. And we don't know what happens to him. But Zach's father ends up getting a gift in a box that he sets down in his workshop down in the family's basement. That's later to be revealed to be this yellow watch that Zach ends up finding in a box of junk that the family's going to get rid of. And he's like, oh, I can sell this on eBay, right? So he puts on the watch after he has his altercation at school with these two bullies in front of Francesca. And Francesca decides to give him a second chance. So he's going to go over to her house to, hang out with her. Well, when he goes there, she just wants to do chores and stuff, so he's messing around with his watch outside, and he discovers that the watch can put him in this paradoxical hyper time that the movie pretty much flaunts as the reason why the movie's called Clockstoppers, right? So he goes into hyper time, and he doesn't know it at first, but when he gets out of it, he realizes that like 30 minutes had passed by, and he's like, well, I was out there for 30 minutes, but to Francesca, it was a few seconds, right? So he has an altercation, and he ends up showing Francesca what happens when he pushes the watch, and she gets involved in this, and they put two and two together that this is a superpowered gadget that they've been gifted here, and they shouldn't sell it or get rid of it, but use it for something good. So they decide to go on a pranking spree. They end up pranking the town, getting some revenge on Zach's bullies, and they have a fun date, and they end up getting close together enough to keep hanging out, which kind of ties into another plot with their friend Meeker, who has like a DJ competition, and they go to this club and help Meeker with his DJing, and they bid farewell, and they agree to go on another date, right? Well, let's just say some problems arise as something to do with this watch here. I want to say the guy's name is Michael Biehn. Yeah, Michael Biehn. He was in the Terminator movies. He's the main bad villain of this movie, and he's looking for the watch, and he's gotten suspicion that French Stewart's character must have jumped it off to Zach's father. So they go rummaging through Zach's house, and now Zach has to pretty much find a way to stop these guys who also have hyper time technology. And he pretty much goes on a run from this point on in the movie, trying to escape them. He ends up finding French Stewart's character. He gets wanted by the police after he steals a car, and he has to rope in hit Francesca to help him because something's happened to his father. They need to go get to his father, but it might be too late. And then they incorporate Meeker near the end, and they pretty much go to this main headquarters base where this watch was made, and they wrap up the story there. There might be a happy ending for Zach. There's an overlying plot involving a car that he wants throughout the movie that might play into the end, and he gets the girl and becomes a hero. And there's sequel bait there too, but nonetheless, that's what you're going to expect out of Clockstoppers. Now, Clockstoppers, right, I don't really have much negatives with this movie, but I'll just bring them up right to the surface. One thing I do not get about this film, and trust me, I know there's some logic you have to put at the door when you watch something like this. Time travel movies and movies that kind of involve like a paradox time and space thing that like the Flash comics and even the recent Flash movie has brought to the forefront. There's some disbelief you got to put out the door to kind of understand the logic with a lot of this stuff. And while the movie has its own continuity, there's a thing with the watch, right? When you're in hyper time, the only thing that can take you out of it, I think, is like liquid nitrogen that they shoot out of a gun to freeze you, to put you back into time, which I guess is supposed to signify if your molecules are running so much, you get hot and you're having so much energy, so that cold will put you back down, right? Which seems sensical, right? But if you've ever taken a physics course, and if you're really saying that your molecules are moving so fast, that's what puts you in hypertime, you would be moving so fast that everything around you would be catching on fire. And yeah, maybe the liquid nitrogen aspect does help you put you back into reality, but the kids are just wearing street clothes, and it gets kind of wonky. It gets kind of wonky. Especially, like I said, if you're an adult with any science background or taking science courses at like a university or something, you're going to notice some things that just don't work in reality. But it's a piece of fiction, and I can look over some things about it. There's also a thing where as long as you're holding somebody with the watch, apparently it zaps everybody that you're touching in contact with. It puts you into hypertime. As long as if Zach's wearing the watch and he's touching Francesca, they get put in hypertime. But if Zach is not touching her and he pushes the watch again, she's stuck in hyper time, right? What I don't get is how that activation part of the movie works, because there's another part of the movie dealing with this room of sorts at this lab that just keeps people in hyper time. There's no watch or anything. It just, you're in the room, you get to put yourself in hyper time. There's another layer with the watch. It gets broken, it gets like dropped in water, and they have to blow dry to get it fixed, and it's kind of corrupted. And Zach gets this idea to kind of break the watch even further and put himself into like this molecular state where he can just be transparent and go through people and stuff. But like I said, with the science behind it, if your atoms are moving that fast, if you put your hand through somebody, you're not just going to phase through them, you're pretty much slicing them. That will not work anatomically. I don't know. It's just the science part. Like I said, the film has its rules, but it's so wonky in some areas. It's a mild negative. You know, I could really go on about it. That is a detraction. And another thing I don't like about this movie is the nonsensical stuff that goes on. You know, I'm not going to lie. Agent Cody Banks, you can consider this movie to have some nonsensical points. But I think a lot of the nonsensical things that happen in this movie are to facilitate Cody trying to get to Natalie. Right? Here, their date, right? Zach and Francesca's date involves them going to prank the town, right? Now there's some give and takes with that. They get to get some revenge on the bullies, yeah. But it's just really dumb, right? I would think that maybe they would have something better than that. Oh, let's just go on the town on a date and just prank people and get, you know, have a little lighthearted moment, blah blah blah. It is what it is. It's just, there's a lot of goofy moments in the movie that just kind of stick out to me. And if it's not scenes like that, it's mostly to do with this over-the-top thing that Frakes put into this movie, right? You have these cutaways of Zach doing just random BMX tricks down the street because, you know, it's the early 2000s. BMX is the rage. The Tony Hawk Pro Skater movies are super popular. We have to have some extreme sports level going on in this movie at all times, no matter what. And it doesn't really add anything to the movie. It's just there. It's a product of its time, and it's kind of dated. But other than that, I have a lot of compliments with this movie. And I want to start off with the obvious. The CGI in the movie is prevalent. But I dare say, and I agree with my boy Strange Michael and Night of the Living Dude. He's the same person, by the way. The CGI looks way better than it probably deserves to. Now, you can tell this movie is relatively low budget. There's not a lot of set pieces in the film. But a lot of the budget went to the CGI to make this time effect stuff look cool. And for the most part, it does. The freeze frame stuff, the way they make water look cool, is absolutely breathtaking for a film like this. Especially when you're watching it on like a 4K player that automatically bumps up the rendering of DVDs. It looks great in HD. I mean, it holds up. The CGI is not dated in this movie. And I think that's the biggest saving grace to it. Because if it had bad CGI, I don't think this movie will hold up as well as it does. Despite some mild dated elements and some weird wonkiness to the story. But yeah, the CGI looks great. Jonathan Frakes' camera work, you know, there are some cool little chase sequences, some cool action scenes, and for the most part, some fun direction choices that they went with here. Particularly with like some weapons, they're like water guns loaded with like liquid nitrogen pellets. That's a cool thing. Or I think they're paintball guns. That's such a cool touch to this movie. And I don't know, the costume designer who designed the costumes of this movie definitely was leaning to that 2000s teenager demographic, but that looks good on camera too. The color hues looks great. The soundtrack to the movie's excellent. Yeah, on filmmaking capability, this movie really holds up. Now for the acting, Jesse Bradford's acting is kind of stock, but he's pretty good in this. He was just as good as playing the character in Bring It On and Far From Home as he was in this. I've definitely seen this movie more than those, but he was good here. Francesca, beautiful girl. I think her name is Paula Garces. She played the love interest of Harold in the Harold and Kumar movies. She's gorgeous, and she was breathtaking in every scene she was in. I mean, she was just fun. She had a fun little accent to her that was flared throughout the movie. I like the background of her character, and I like that she had good dynamics with Jesse Bradford. The only wallflower character I don't really think was best utilized was Meeker. Meeker was definitely the comedic relief of the trio, but he's hardly in the movie. But when he's there, he's fun, and it's a fun enough time. I don't know who the guy is who played Meeker, but he was fun. Michael Beale playing the villain, that was a great choice. French Stewart, I think this is one of my favorite French Stewart performances that I've seen him in a film. The dad character, if you did not know this, I think the dad in the movie played Calabar in Halloween Town. I'm pretty sure they're the same person. They look identical. And I might be wrong, but I'm probably right here. When I saw that this time watching this movie, I was blown away. And what's her name? Julie Sweeney, is that her name? The woman from SNL years ago that made that really bad movie It's Pat. She's in this as the mom, and I used to see her in a lot more stuff. I think she was in that movie The Stupids. I want to say that was her. I used to watch a bunch of movies with her that came from the 90s, and seeing her in this caught me off guard too. And I don't know, like, the whole film as a whole just exudes this cool factor, right? And I think what really separates it from other movies in a similar genre back in the day, like, this movie can't really be considered a spy movie, even though it has its like hostage situation type storytelling going for it. It kind of fits that mold, but not really. These kids, they acquire gadgets that kind of make them superheroes, and I don't know, it's a very unique story. You would think that a time paradox story would go down the rigmarole of time travel and typical cliches, but no, it brings something different that we see in like the Flash comics in DC, where Barry Allen is able to like stop time because he moves so fast and kind of enters his own own area of time and space where he can just transcend, go back in time, go forward in time. He can pause because he's moving so fast. Everything feels like it's completely still to him. It has that going for it, and I really enjoyed that about the film. And it's really easy to get invested into, right? And all in all, like I said, I don't think it's as good as Cody Banks. It has more flaws to it, but man, is this movie memorable. And it's way too good than it deserves to be. It's one of the better Nickelodeon movies I've seen for sure. Definitely a unique premise. It delivers that teenage fantasy almost perfectly for what it is. And it's a blast of a film. So if I had to give this film a rating from a 0 to 5 stars, for its issues, I'd maybe give this like a 4 out of 5 stars. That might sound high, but given that kids' movies just aren't made like this these days, I'm willing to prop up older films like this that are willing to create self-contained stories, willing to take chances on originality, willing to take chances on something without long-standing brand recognition like Hollywood's doing today. Like, I'm tired of just seeing Hollywood say, oh, we're going to make a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie because that's a 40-year-old franchise. Oh, we're going to make another Spider-Man movie or blah, blah, blah. Just long-standing IP after long-standing IP. They just don't make films like this anymore with originality and willingness to take chances and try to offer something new to the audience. I think this film made money, and good for that, because the ad campaign was pretty much legendary of its time, and it deserved to make money. The fact that we never got a sequel out of it, I think, kind of helps the legacy of the movie, though, to be honest. If they came back and did a Clockstoppers 2, if Frakes came back, and maybe if they had the same production team working here, It probably would have been just one of those, hey, we're going to make a clone of the first. But I'm kind of curious to see what would have happened there. Would it have been better than Agent Cody Banks 2? I don't know. But it's unfortunate. We never got a comic book spinoff or anything. I think there was a novelization of the movie that is relatively cheap online. I might try to get that to see if they added anything to the story because I'm curious. But man, great little flick. Definitely recommend. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Clockstoppers. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this movie before. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.